Hi, friends. Welcome back to True Crime Echoes. If you're new here, my name is Your Name. And on this channel, we dive deep into real stories of crime, tragedy, and the hidden truths that live behind headlines. These aren't just stories about crime, they're stories about people, families, and the choices that change everything. Today we're exploring one of the most disturbing family tragedies I've ever come across. The case of Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead twin sisters, whose resentment toward their mother Nikki spiraled into a crime so violent and heartbreaking that it shocked an entire community. This is not just about murder, it's about family love, anger, and how cycles of trauma can sometimes end in the darkest ways imaginable. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's walk through the story together. Chapter 1: Roots of a Broken Childhood. When we talk about tragic crimes within families, it's never just about one single moment of violence. Usually, the story begins much earlier in the cracks of childhood, in the absence of stability, and in the weight of generational wounds. This case is no different. To understand what happened between Jasmiyah Tasmiyah and their mother, we need to go all the way back to where it started with Nikki, their mom. Nikki's real name was Jasmiyah Whitehead, but everyone called her Nikki. She didn't have the kind of childhood where you felt safe or cared for. Her mother, Linda, gave birth to her while serving time in jail. Imagine that the first hours of your life spent without a mother to hold you, without that bond that every child deserves. Nikki was passed to her grandmother Della, who stepped up to raise her. Della tried to give Nikki structure, but the truth is Nikki grew up always aware that her own mother wasn't there for her. That kind of abandonment shapes you in ways you don't even realize until years later. By the time Nikki was a teenager, she was restless, rebellious, looking for something to fill that void. At 16, she ran away chasing freedom parties and the sense of belonging she had never really known at home. When Nikki became a young mother herself, those wounds didn't magically heal. She gave birth to twin girls, identical sisters named Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah, in 1993. But Nikki was still barely out of childhood herself. She wasn't ready, and deep down, she probably knew it. Just like her own mother had left her, Nikki turned to Della once again. It was Della, the great-grandmother, who became the steady presence in the twins' lives. This pattern, mothers passing responsibility down to the next generation, wasn't just circumstance. It was a cycle. And cycles like this are dangerous because while they keep the children fed, clothed, and schooled, they leave behind deep scars. Children grow up asking themselves, why wasn't my mom there? Why wasn't I enough? Nikki still visited, still showed up, but never in the way her daughters needed. To them, she wasn't mom. She was more like a fun older sister who popped in and out, bringing gifts, laughing, sometimes trying to help. But then she was gone again. Della was the real foundation, the one who tucked them in at night and made sure they got to school. Looking back, it's clear this was the first fracture in their family story. Nikki had inherited abandonment, and unknowingly, she was passing it down. And though Della did her best, the girls would grow up carrying the weight of a mother they couldn't quite claim, and a grandmother who filled the space but couldn't replace what was missing. That was the soil in which this tragedy took root. Before the violence, before the crime, there was already pain, already conflict, already a pattern that seemed destined to repeat itself, and sadly it would. Chapter 2: The Twins' Early Years. When the twins Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah were born on November 27, 1993, it should have been the start of a new chapter for Nikki. But she was only 18 years old. She was still figuring out her own life, still chasing freedom and love, and the weight of raising two babies was more than she could handle. So just as it had happened with her, Nikki turned to Della, her grandmother, the woman who had already raised her, to raise the twins. And Della, by all accounts, poured her heart into those girls. She made sure their lives were full of structure and opportunity, the kind of things Nikki never had. Ballet lessons, Girl Scouts, school clubs, music, anything she could give them she did. The twins were described as bright, high-achieving, even gifted. Teachers saw them as polite, focused, straight A students. On the outside, they looked like kids who had everything going for them, but appearances only tell part of the story. The The truth was, their family life was complicated from the start. Della might have been the caretaker, but Nikki was still present in flashes, dropping in with expensive clothes, keeping their hair done, making sure they looked the part of well-cared-for girls. To outsiders, it was a picture of stability. The girls looked sharp, performed well in school, and had a home to go back to. Inside, though, there was confusion. Who was the real mother, Della, who set the rules, cooked their meals, and tucked them in? Or Nikki, who swept in like a cool older sister, laughed with them, then disappeared again into her own world of parties and relationships? That line between mother and sister blurred early, and for children, that kind of instability plants seeds of resentment. And twins, well, twins are a force of their own. They had each other in a way that no one else could understand. Built-in best friends, partners, in everything, mirrors of one another. But that closeness also made them stronger against the outside world. If one felt misunderstood, the other felt it too. If one resisted authority, the other pushed back harder. They had a bond that was both beautiful and dangerous, because when twins decide the world is against them, they can create their own reality together. As children, Jazz and Taz weren't violent. They weren't reckless. By most accounts, they were good girls, smart, funny, sociable. But they were also learning silently how to navigate a world where their mother wasn't truly their mother, and their great-grandmother was doing double duty as the head of the household. They saw Nikki more as a visitor than a parent, and every visit reminded them that she had chosen not to raise them. In those early years, the twins seemed to be thriving, but under the surface, the cracks were forming. The absence of a stable maternal role, the blurred lines of authority, and the unspoken questions about loyalty and love, all of that built a quiet storm. And one day, that storm would break. Chapter 3. A New Life with Robert. By the time Nikki was in her mid-20s, life seemed to be settling into something more stable. She'd gone to cosmetology school, built a reputation as a talented stylist, and for the first time, she had a steady income and a sense of independence. On the surface, it looked like Nikki was finally stepping into the role of a responsible adult. And then she met Robert Head. Robert was 30 years older than Nikki. He was a long-haul truck driver, a man who spent most of his time on the road. To some people, that kind of age gap raises eyebrows, and let's be honest, even Nikki's friends questioned it. But the relationship worked for them. Robert was often away, which meant Nikki had the freedom she was used to. But when he was home, he provided stability, a house in a gated community, and the image of a traditional family life that Nikki had never known. For Nikki, Robert's presence wasn't just about romance. It was about a chance at redemption. She had these two daughters, Jazz and Tass, who were growing into teenagers, and she knew she had been more of a visitor than a parent. By her early 30s, Nikki was ready to change that. She wanted her girls back. She wanted to be a real mother this time. And Robert's house, with its promise of safety and normalcy, felt like the perfect place to start over. But here's the problem: Nikki's daughters didn't see it that way. To them, their mother wasn't a mom, they already had one in Della. She had raised them, guided them, been there every single day. Nikki, on the other hand, was the fun one who showed up occasionally, not the authority figure. So when Nikki went to court, fought for custody, and won, the twins didn't feel rescued. They felt ripped away from the only home they had ever truly known. Imagine being 13, comfortable in your school, your neighborhood, your routine, and suddenly being told you're moving in with a mother who feels more like a stranger and her much older boyfriend you barely know. For Nikki, it was the start of her second chance. For the twins, it was the beginning of resentment that would only grow stronger with time. This was the turning point. Nikki saw a fresh start. Her daughters saw an intrusion. And from that moment forward, every small disagreement, every rule, every curfew, it all became fuel for a fire that was waiting to explode. Chapter 4. When Mother became the enemy. When the twins moved into Robert's house with Nikki, it wasn't the happy reunion Nikki had imagined. She thought she was finally stepping into her role as a real mom, setting rules, creating structure, trying to build the kind of stable household she never had. But for Jazz and Taz, it felt like prison. At Della's, they had freedom. They had their school, their friends, their routines. With Nikki, it was a brand new environment, and worse, it came with rules they weren't used to. Nikki suddenly expected curfews, chores, respect. She didn't want them repeating the same mistakes she had made at their age, drinking, sneaking out, running wild. She was trying to course correct their lives before it was too late. But from the twins' perspective, this was hypocrisy at its finest. They knew about their mom's past. They'd seen her out partying, laughing with men, living her life with no rules. And now here she was, suddenly demanding they behave like perfect daughters. They didn't see discipline, they saw double standards. And the resentment began to fester. Arguments started, small eye rolls, shouting matches, slammed doors. But soon they turned violent. Neighbors would later recall hearing chaos in the house, shouting, banging sounds of struggle. Nikki wasn't just dealing with teenage rebellion. She was dealing with two girls who had each other's backs in every fight. If one lashed out, the other joined in. Together, they were a force she couldn't control. For the first time, Nikki started calling the police. Imagine what it takes for a mother to dial 911 on her own children. But that's how bad it got. Reports described biting, scratching, full-on attacks. One of the girls was even known for biting during fights, leaving Nikki bruised and scarred, not just physically, but emotionally. And every time Nikki tried to regain authority, it only backfired. Sometimes the girls would be sent back to live with Della, which to them felt like a victory. They had figured it out. If they pushed hard enough, if they made life hell, they could go back to the home they preferred. That cycle, violence, police, return to Della, just reinforced the power struggle. For Nikki, it was devastating. She wanted to be the mother she never had, but every step she took seemed to push her daughters further away. And the more she tried to assert control, the more they saw her not as a mom, but as an enemy. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was war inside a family home. And deep down, Nikki must have sensed it couldn't end well. Chapter 5. The Cycle of Violence. As things at Robert's house spiraled, Nikki found herself living a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Every day felt like walking on broken glass. Her daughters weren't just slamming doors or sneaking out, they were attacking her. 2 against 1, and she was outnumbered in her own home. The violence became so bad that Nikki started calling 911 regularly. Imagine the humiliation and heartbreak of telling strangers I can't control my own children. Police officers in the area grew familiar with the Whitehead address. Each time they arrived, it was the same story: chaos, shouting, Nikki bruised the twins defiant. At one point, Nikki admitted to friends that she was scared in her own house. She wanted to love her daughters, to pull them back from the edge, but instead she was defending herself against them. And here's what made it worse: whenever the fights escalated, the girls often got what they wanted. When the situation hit a breaking point, the court would sometimes send them back to Della, the great-grandmother. For Jazz and Tass, this was a victory. They had cracked the system. They had learned that if they pushed hard enough, if they made life unbearable, the reward was freedom, back to the life they preferred. It was like teaching them that violence worked. The courts tried to fix things by ordering counseling. Over time, the family cycled through as many as 6 different therapists, but nothing changed. Counselors noted how the family seemed to thrive in chaos, how no one wanted to take responsibility for the dysfunction. Sessions ended without progress, and at home the fighting never stopped. It wasn't just Nikki against her daughters either. There were deeper fractures. Nikki's own mother, Linda, had hardly been in the picture for most of Nikki's life. Yet now she was chiming in, telling Nikki she needed to step up and take control of her kids. Maybe it was guilt, maybe pride, maybe just the need to assert herself after years of distance. But the pressure was there. And then there was Della, who had raised both Nikki and the twins, and who still saw herself as the anchor of the family. So you had 3 generations of women, Linda, Nikki, and Della, all pulling in different directions, all believing they knew what was best. And caught in the middle were 2 teenage girls, angry, confused, and learning that manipulation and aggression could get them exactly what they wanted. For Nikki, this wasn't just about discipline anymore. It was about survival. She wanted to save her daughters from repeating her mistakes. She wanted to be the kind of mother she had never had. But the harder she tried, the more the cycle of violence tightened its grip. and deep down, everyone who saw it, the police, the counselors, even the neighbors, knew this couldn't keep going forever. Something had to give. The only question was when and how devastating the break would be. Chapter 6: The Calm Before the Storm. By the beginning of 2010, the family's situation had reached a crossroads. After years of back and forth, after countless police calls and counseling sessions, a judge finally ruled that the twins would once again live with their mother. Nikki had been fighting for this, believing that if she didn't take full control now, she might lose her daughters forever. But for Jas and Tass, this decision felt like a sentence. They didn't see it as going home. They saw it as being dragged away from the only stability they had ever known with Della. And at 16 years old, their resentment was sharper than ever. When they moved back into Robert's house in Conyers, the tension was immediate. Nikki tried to set a new tone to make this a true homecoming. She even held a little welcome party trying to celebrate this fresh start. But instead of laughter and warmth, the night ended in chaos. One of the girls lost her temper, food was thrown, shouting filled the room, and family members were shoved into walls. What was supposed to be a reset only proved how deeply broken things had become. Nikki tried to push through, determined not to give up. She laid down rules, curfews, school responsibilities, new boundaries. She even transferred the twins to a new high school, hoping a change of environment would help. But to the girls, this was just one more way their mother was controlling them. They were furious. They hated the new school. They hated the new rules, and most of all, they hated feeling trapped. Meanwhile, Robert was gone most of the time, out on the road driving trucks. So it was just Nikki and the girls, 3 women under one roof, locked in constant battle. Every interaction seemed to end in shouting. Every rule Nikki tried to enforce only pushed the girls further into rage. And then came the threats. At least one family member later recalled hearing Jas tell her mother, flat out, "If I have to live with you again, I'll kill you." It sounded like teenage dramatics at the time, but looking back, it was a warning that no one fully grasped. The house had become a powder keg. Every argument was another spark, every slammed door, another tremor. Nikki believed she was doing the right thing, that she was finally being the mother her daughters needed. But the twins didn't see it that way. To them, she wasn't saving them, she was suffocating them. And in just a matter of days, all that pressure, all that anger would explode into something irreversible. Chapter 7: January 13th, 2010. The morning of January the 13th, 2010 began like any other, at least on the surface. Nikki was at home with her daughters, trying once again to keep some sense of normalcy. But beneath that roof, the tension had reached its breaking point. According to what we know later, the girls had missed the school bus. They claimed they were going to walk, but their story would unravel in time. What we do know is that an argument started that morning, one more clash in a household already drowning in conflict. This time, though, it turned violent in a way no one could take back. Investigators later pieced together that Nikki confronted the girls about their behavior. Maybe it was about school, maybe about respect. It doesn't really matter. Words escalated to shouting, and then to blows. One of the girls grabbed a household object. Some accounts say a vase, others a pot, and a fight erupted in the kitchen. Nikki fought back hard. She was a young woman, only in her early 30s, and she wasn't going to go down easily. But against 2 16-year-old daughters, both fueled by years of pent-up rage, she didn't stand a chance. The struggle spilled through the house. Furniture shifted, items broke, blood splattered across walls. Nikki fought for her life with everything she had, but the twins had crossed a line. They armed themselves with knives and attacked their own mother. What happened next is almost impossible to imagine. Nikki was stabbed over 80 times. 80. That's not just murder, that's fury unleashed. That's what investigators call overkill, the kind of violence that screams of personal hatred. And even then, Nikki still fought back. Her body showed defensive wounds, bite marks, signs that she tried desperately to survive. When it was over, she was left in the bathtub, her blood staining the room around her. The house looked like a war zone. Towels were missing from the closet, later found stuffed in the washing machine, as if someone had tried to clean up but realized the mess was too big to hide. It was sloppy, chaotic, the work of teenagers who had no idea how to cover up what they'd done. And yet, in those first moments after the killing, Jazz and Taz tried to play innocent. They left the house, then returned, eventually running into a police officer patrolling the neighborhood. Taz came rushing out, crying, waving her arms, claiming they had just gotten home from school and found their mother dead. To the officer, it was shocking, a bloody crime scene, two hysterical girls and a mother brutally murdered. At first glance, it looked like a home invasion gone horribly wrong. But underneath their sobs and trembling hands, something didn't add up. The tragedy Nikki had feared, the possibility that her daughter's anger would consume everything, had just come true, and the horror of it was only beginning to unfold. Chapter 8. The investigation unravels. When police first stepped into Nikki's home that day, they were overwhelmed by what they saw. Blood everywhere, broken objects scattered around, and Nikki's body lying in the bathtub. It looked less like a planned crime, and more like an explosion of rage. At first, the twins stuck to their story. They said they'd missed the bus that morning, walked to school, spent the whole day in class, and then came home to find their mother brutally murdered. They cried, they clung to each other, and to the officers in that moment they seemed like devastated daughters who had just lost their mom. But the details didn't add up. Officers noticed something strange. Both girls were still wearing mittens. Even while being questioned, they didn't take them off. When asked to remove them, scratches and bite marks appeared on their hands and arms. They tried to explain them away, saying they'd been fighting each other or that stress made them bite themselves. But investigators knew wounds like that don't just happen by accident. And then came the surveillance footage. Police pulled tapes from a nearby gas station. On the morning of the murder, the cameras captured the twins walking near the station around 10:15 a.m., long after school had already started. Then a car pulled up, and the girls climbed inside. Minutes later, they were dropped off at school. This was a massive hole in their alibi. If they hadn't been in class when they said they were, where had they been? The physical evidence told its own story. A broken vase at the scene carried Nikki's DNA, along with traces from the twins. Towels had been taken from the closet and thrown into the washing machine soaked in blood. Investigators could see the half-hearted cleanup attempt, a clear sign the killer or killers had panicked. And then there were the bite marks. Nikki's body showed deep impressions that matched human teeth. Investigators requested the twins' dental records. It was almost impossible to tell which girl was responsible, but the marks lined up. At least one of the daughters had sunk her teeth into her own mother during the struggle. The more evidence they gathered, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a break-in and it wasn't some unknown attacker. The brutality of the crime, the overkill, the defensive wounds, the chaos pointed directly back inside the home. Within months, investigators had built their case. They had the scratches, the bite marks, the broken vase, the surveillance footage, and the sloppy attempt to clean the crime scene. There was only one conclusion left to draw. Nikki hadn't been killed by a stranger. She had been killed by the two people she was fighting hardest to save her own daughters. Chapter 9. The Confessions. It took investigators 4 long months to gather all the evidence, but eventually they sat the twins down separately. And that's when the cracks in their story finally split wide open. Faced with the surveillance footage, the scratches, the bite marks, and the broken vase linking them directly to the crime, both girls broke down. Away from each other without the safety of their twin bond, they confessed. Their stories mirrored one another almost perfectly. The fight had started in the kitchen that morning. Nikki was upset, maybe about school, maybe about their behavior. It didn't matter. Words became shouting, and shouting became violence. According to the twins, Nikki grabbed something, a pot, or maybe that vase, and came at them. In the struggle, Taz picked up a knife. The stabbing began. It wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. It was brutal. Nikki fought hard, leaving scratches and bite marks on her daughters, as she tried desperately to survive. But the rage pouring out of those girls was too much. Over 80 stab wounds. That's not just killing someone that's destroying them. That's years of anger, resentment, and defiance, erupting all at once. One detail stuck with me during the confession. The girls admitted their mother left the house at one point during the struggle, then came back in exhausted before the attack started again. Investigators even found a small trail of blood near a neighbor's front door, as if Nikki had tried to escape and get help, but no one answered. That detail haunts me, the thought of her so close to rescue only to be dragged back into the nightmare inside her own home. When it was all over, the twins panicked. They tried wiping up the blood, tossing towels into the washing machine, but it was too much, far too much. So they gave up and left only to return later and put on their performance for police, crying, sobbing, playing the role of grieving daughters. But the evidence was undeniable, and now so were their own words. In court, both girls pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, possession of a knife during a crime, and falsifying statements. They were sentenced to 30 years in prison each. Think about that. At 16 years old, they had destroyed their mother, shattered their family, and locked themselves into a future behind bars. One act of violence had cost 3 women their lives, Nikki's in the most literal sense, and Jazz and Tass in the slow ticking years of prison walls. Chapter 10. Aftermath and Reflection. In the end, this story didn't just break one family, it broke 3 generations. Nikki was gone, brutally taken by the very daughters she had fought so hard to reclaim, and the twins, just 16 years old, were locked away for 30 years. Their youth, their freedom, their future, it all ended on that January morning. But the ripples didn't stop there. Della, the great-grandmother, who had raised both Nikki and the twins, never fully accepted what had happened. To her, Jazz and Tass were still her babies. She defended them, convinced that they had simply been pushed too far, that they weren't capable of such cruelty on their own. She clung to the idea that they had been victims of circumstance even as the evidence said otherwise. Linda, Nikki's mother, saw it differently. She remembered hearing her granddaughter threaten Nikki, "If I have to live with you again, I'll kill you." And 2 weeks later, Nikki was dead. To Linda, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a failure of everyone involved. She believed Della had too much control, that she had turned the girls against their mother, and that Nikki never stood a chance. And then there were the twins themselves. Behind bars, they earned their GEDs, took up classes, tried to find purpose in a place where time stands still. Some people point to that as hope, as proof that maybe they can rebuild something when they're finally released. Others say, it doesn't matter, that nothing can undo what they did. What makes this case so haunting isn't just the brutality of the murder, it's the questions it leaves behind. Was Nikki doomed from the start, caught in the same cycle of abandonment that had marked her own childhood? Could therapy, stability, or intervention have changed the outcome? Or was this tragedy always inevitable once resentment became hatred inside that home? For me, what lingers is Nikki's fight. She didn't give up on her daughters. She wanted to save them, to break the pattern that had shaped her own life. But in trying to be the mother they needed, she became the enemy they wanted gone. 3 women, 3 generations, 1 cycle that ended in blood. And a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous battles don't happen in the streets. They happen behind closed doors in the places we're supposed to feel safest. Chapter 11. Final Thoughts and Legacy. Looking back on this case, it's hard not to feel a heavy mix of sadness and frustration. 3 women, Nikki, Jazz, and Tass, each became casualties of a cycle that had been building for generations. Nikki wanted more than anything to be the kind of mother she never had, but her daughters only saw her as an intruder. The twins, barely 16, made a choice in one morning of rage that cost them everything: their mother's life, their freedom, and their future. What strikes me most is how many warning signs there were along the way. Police calls, counseling sessions, court hearings. It wasn't that people didn't notice. Everyone knew this family was in turmoil. But somehow the pieces never came together in time. And I can't help but wonder, if they had received consistent, serious intervention early on, would things have turned out differently? For some, this story reinforces the idea that cycles of trauma repeat themselves unless something truly breaks them. Nikki's childhood had been unstable, her relationship with her own mother fractured. She fought to be different for her daughters, but in trying to hold on, she only became the target of their rage. For others, the lesson lies in how fragile the concept of home can be. We think of family as our safe place, but sometimes the danger doesn't come from strangers. It comes from within the walls, where love is supposed to live. The case of Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead isn't just about a murder, It's about the unraveling of a family. It's about anger left unchecked, about resentment that hardened into hatred, and about a tragedy that could never be undone. In the end, Nikki is remembered as a mother who tried. She wasn't perfect, none of us are, but she fought for her daughters when it would have been easier to walk away. And maybe that's the cruelest part, her determination to love them cost her everything. And that, my friends, is the tragic story of Nikki Whitehead and her daughters Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah. A family torn apart by years of conflict, miscommunication, and anger ending in a moment of violence that destroyed 3 lives forever. This case leaves us with so many questions. Could anything have changed this outcome? Was it inevitable, given the years of instability and resentment? And how do we as a society recognize the warning signs before it's too late? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you believe the twins were pushed to their breaking point? Or do you think this was cold-blooded murder, fueled by hatred? Let's talk about it. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing to True Crime Echoes so you won't miss the next deep dive into another real crime case. Until then, take care of yourselves, make good choices, and I'll see you in the next one.